Muy bien, hemos escuchado una canción buenísima de Yomo Toro, el tremendo cuatrista puertorriqueño, El Sapo. Y con esta canción, ¿quién no quiere empezar una conversación buenísima con mi invitada? We just heard music by Yomo Toro. He's a great cuatrista from Puerto Rico, and this is called El Sapo. And speaking of Puerto Rico, and with this great music, I am so happy to welcome my guest from Puerto Rico. Yay! Waleska Lugo-DeJesús. Vamos a conversar esta noche con Waleska Lugo-DeJesús. Ella es la CEO, la jefa principal de esta organización conocida como Inclusive Strategies en la ciudad de Springfield. Y yo sé que tú tienes una información tremenda para compartir. Bienvenida a Tertulia.
Gracias, Raquel. Es un placer estar aquí contigo. It's so great to be here with you. I think last time we were together was 10 or maybe 12 years ago.
I know. I am so glad to have you here as my guest. So welcome once again to Tertulia.
Thank you.
And I know that you have a lot of information to share about this organization because we were talking about it. I was not familiar at all with it. And you opened my eyes to this great place. And this is called Inclusive Strategies. How long has it been in effect, and how long have you, when did you create it?
Thank you, Raquel. First, I want to say that opening up to the canción of the Coqui was refreshing. It also gave me an opportunity to relax and dance. But that's what I do for work, right? I get to have open conversations with different businesses, with different organizations, in a way that is healing and human-centered. So Inclusive Strategies, I've been a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for about 21 years, and it was after the pandemic. So it's been about 4 years now that I decided to do it 100% full-time. So what I do is I hope to create meaningful social change in the community, and how I do it is human-centered and racial healing.
And what inspired you to do this, Waleska?
Thank you for asking. So 21 years ago, I remember, well, it's 22, I remember because it's my son's age. It was the first time that I understood that I walked through the world as a person of color, and I had to understand what that meant for me. You shared when you opened the program that I'm from Puerto Rico. So I'm born in Puerto Rico, but I come from a really big family that was raised in the north end of Springfield on Jefferson Street specifically. And when I lived in Puerto Rico, I had the opportunity to work for a global medical gas company that flew me out to Ohio with all of these great benefits. And even though I was given the opportunity to have an apartment, a car, a great bonus, a good salary, I realized that it was hard for me to incorporate in the community, and that everywhere that I walked and everything that I tried to do, there was some barriers and a different type of treatment. So everything from being criticized of what I ate to what I wore. I remember one time coming into work and being asked if I could, in a short form of the story, assimilate into the culture by wearing something more toned down, because I had a fuchsia pink shirt, which represented who I was as a Puerto Riqueña and really all I traveled with. So it was in that space where that inspired me to want to create equity so that people didn't face the similar things that I faced, which was going into restaurants and not being served, trying to look for apartments and being told that there weren't any available, and other things that happened to me professionally.
I can relate to that, or those types of experiences, Waleska. And when you were mentioning about the restaurant, it came to my mind immediately a really ugly incident that I had in a restaurant, as well as not being served. And the thing that bothered me the most and hurt me the most is that I was treating my parents. My parents had come to visit me. Mm-hmm. I am originally from Peru. Mm-hmm. So they had come to spend some time with me, and I thought, yeah, I'll bring them to a nice place to eat, classy, elegant. And we found that, but we found no service. It was a really bad experience, and it was something new for my parents because they had never been exposed to something like that in my country and here. Well, maybe it was because most people in my country are brown also, so, but here it was a very an ugly experience. So I can relate to what you're saying. So you used your experience to establish this organization.
Exactly. First, thank you, Raquel, for sharing your lived experience with me. And I guess that in unexpected way, this the qualifier for my 40 years of experience in racial equity, diversity, inclusion is my life experience. And even though I've been doing this work for 21 years, I realized that even within your story, right, that devaluing of another human being can be humiliating, but it can also, create an environment that is exclusive. And so my goal within my work is to explain to people, to organizations, to systems, to institutions that there are 4 different levels of racism, but it really does start with the individual.
4 levels of racism. Can you elaborate on that, please?
I can. So I center my work around internalized, interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism. And so as you shared the story and I share my story about what inspired me to grow into this work, I realized that I needed to understand more my history, my culture, and what is my identity. So, for example, in Puerto Rico, we were taught history in a different way than I learned it in my 20s here. And, learning things and myths like Christopher Columbus saved us, and those atrocities and the genocide and the different things that happened. So I had to discover more about myself. The importance of understanding the history, culture, and identity of who you are in my own journey and self-discovery helped me understand that 100% impacts how you interact with other people, and that's the second level, which is the interpersonal. So that relationship between individuals. And so if I carry some misconception or some misunderstanding about any oppressed group, then I can have a bias or a microaggression, or even carry privilege thinking that I am better than someone else just because of the color of my skin. So those are the first 2. Then the institutional and structural racism. Institutional occurs within systems of power, and that could be your workplace, it could be faith-based, it could be a community group, and the systemic racism really occurs within systems of power and across society as a whole. So if we don't, at the micro level, understand that individuals carry power and how they use that power is important, then we need to understand why people interact the way they do, either with fear or with openness. And because we show up as we are, that does affect institutions and systems.
Mm-hmm. And this sounds really interesting, but I was wondering, how do you approach these different types of racism? Like, what tactics do you use when you go to people? Walk me through this. People, organizations contact you? How does it work?
Yeah, I've been blessed to have built a reputation for 21 years locally. Massachusetts, I have national partnership and a global partnership. But there's been so much elevated awareness on equity as a whole that now I don't do much marketing. Businesses come to me if they understand what they want to create in terms of the workplace and equitable environment. So this can look like when I started this work, and I shared that I grew up in Springfield. I was working at the YMCA in Greater Springfield, and then I served on the board. And my North Star there was to help infuse board diversity. I just knew that every board that I sat on, I was either the only Latina, the only female, or the youngest person represented as a Generation Xer. And so that became my North Star. I wanted to make sure that other people didn't have I wanted the policies and the procedures within the different boards to be open to diversity, not only in terms of the makeup, but even generational and all of the different dimensions that people come into. So within that work, I also align racial equity to strategic planning and looking at policies and procedures. And one of the things that often business come to me and ask is, everybody is ready to be more inclusive, to have more people at the table, to expand their staff, and to open doors to new board members. And so I talk about different ways to do succession planning, different ways to onboard people, different ways to recruit from different demographics in the community, and the different dimensions of diversity. But one thing I want to encourage that businesses do and really take a step back is that even though we can focus on policies and procedures, what's most important to understand is that it's people, right? And so that's where the human-centered approach comes in from my work. It's people that uphold policies and procedures. And so if we need to create and we need to advance how programming is created, we need to advance how businesses are developed, we need to advance how things are, collaborations are formed or not. And what drives all of these opportunities to be inclusive, but that don't always exist.
And in these conversations, I was trying to picture when you are speaking about these, the way you approach it. Do the employees also attend, or is it only the people from the administration, the big bosses? How is that in the conversations?
Great question. Thank you. So I often start with the C-suite. And so it is the president, the leadership, the board, which I help understand the importance of the work within the 4 levels of racism, because when they get buy-in, then it's easier for them to expand the work into different departments. So it can be with business resource groups, it could be within human resources, although I often like to make the distinction, and my preference is that racial equity work does not lie within human resources, because this is not disciplinary, right? Racial equity, inclusion, this is all about people having a sense of belonging and knowing that they're a part of an organization that really wants to make a change in the world.
And with all these different organizations that you have worked, did you do a follow-up, or have you had a chance to see if actually something good came out of it? Like, can you give me an example maybe of something that really happened as a consequence of your training or your talks?
Yes, thank you. So some examples, very vivid examples that I could recall in terms of board diversity is I sat on the board that we were looking at board and community engagement. The goal was to have succession planning and to improve the makeup of the board. And when I proposed that we invite community members that aren't staff, aren't leadership, and aren't on the board, just let them sit on a subcommittee that we created for racial equity, there was a lot of opportunity to expand programming. We translated the applications. We expanded opportunities and looked at different ways to provide financial aid for marginalized communities. And as an aside, I intentionally say marginalized instead of minority, because that word is not one of my favorites. I feel that when we use the word minority, people are being, I'll speak for myself, I feel less than. And as a person of color, there are reasons why we have less resources or we have less access, and it's because of systemic oppression that has been happening for years. And I'm happy to see that there's a lot of spaces that people are trying to be more equitable, but it's just the reality that we live in. So that's one example. Another example that I can give, working within, and this was working in the North End and in Mason Square. We were looking everything from health disparities to oral health to access and different community groups. And so that expanded, again, more programming and opportunities for recruitment of local individuals that had talents to be able to advocate for marginalized groups, but also to expand on health and well-being of the community members. And there's thousands and thousands of more examples that I can give in the private sector and in other sectors, but those are two that just came to mind when you asked.
Yeah, that's great. Now, most of your, what should I say, workshops are with private companies. What was coming to my mind is, do you work with schools? Have the schools approach you to try to teach them about this?
Yeah, so my work within racial equity started about 21 years ago, and it was in higher ed. So the way that there's been an evolution of this work, it started as multicultural affairs, then there was diversity became really important, and then people realized, well, diversity is important and it's bringing people to the table, but you have to be inclusive, you have to create practices, you have to be equitable, they have to feel that they belong. There was all of these other elements that came into the work. So higher education was where I can say that I started to expand in that work after the private sector. And I've had some partnerships with different districts, including Springfield Public Schools, and helping support an effort that began as Race Matters, and I'm sure that has been expanded to other things. So it really did start with the principals, with the staff, with the advisors within the schools, and then based on the foundational work that we did around those 4 levels of racism, then they've launched other programming within the schools.
That sounds
very
really
proud.
Good. Yeah, should be, yes. I was looking at your website, and there's something that I saw that I like that you have there on your main page.
I hope there's more than one thing, Raquel.
I'll tell you, this one really, it hit me.
Thank you.
And it says here, change begins with, and then racial equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And are those your 4 pillars that
Yes, those are my pillars, and I try to reinforce the importance of we're all responsible for social change. We're all responsible not only for our own healing, but the healing of our community. And I try to depersonalize so that people understand that this work is really about understanding who you are and the role that you can play within different ways of being engaged, within different ways of creating change. So when you ask about my pillars, I say that when I began to serve in civic engagement, specifically in Massachusetts, started, I realized that I was being recruited to be on so many boards and so many committees as if I was the only Latina, or maybe with the intention, regardless if it was good or not, to check a box. And so I wanted to change that, but then I also realized that I had to manage my time differently. And so if giving back to my community, if creating this world that I wanted to live in, that I wanted my son to grow up in my family, meant that I had to focus. I focused on racial equity, diversity, inclusion, education, and civic engagement. So my personal time is very much invested in that. I would say that the evolution in the past maybe 5 years has been expanding that to the arts and culture, because so you have traditions from Peru that are very much a part of who you are, and Puerto Rico has traditions, including the song and the coquí and that affinity, right, to our history that very much shapes people. And so what I invite, what I hope, and what I ask of any institution that I work with, or company, or even individual, because I have partners that have 13,000 employees and others that have 3. So that, that's the range that we make sure that we focus on what can we do collaboratively, but what can you do as an individual.
Very good. And speaking of websites, would you like to share your website in case anybody wants to get more information?
Yes, thank you, Raquel. So that's www.inclusive-strategies.com.
And is there anything that you would like to add before we close?
Yeah, so my call to action is that we all look for ways to advance our common humanity. I advocate that you understand yourself first, that you seek to control your narrative, that you seek to understand your story, that you seek your purpose. If you are part of any oppressed group, that you don't allow others to dictate your possibilities. And if you're an organization, or if you're a department, or if you're an institution, or if you're a community group, that you look for ways to advocate for healthier communities, that you open shared spaces, that you look to create equitable environments, and together we can all create a world of belonging.
I hope that will become true. Thank you so very much. Muchísimas gracias, Waleska, por haber venido y compartido algo tan interesante. Es alimento para la mente y para el espíritu. Food for thought, food for my spirit also. Thank you so very much for being my guest tonight.
Thank you, Raquel, and all of the oyentes of Tertulia.
Gracias.